Strata consists of giving form to matters, of imprisoning intensities or locking singularities into systems of resonance. Hello everyone, welcome to Flickr Theory Reviews. I'm your host, Tadas Vinokur. Today we're going to discuss a different chapter from A Thousand Plateaus, which is called Geology of Morals. This chapter explores the ways in which the world around us constantly changes, assumes new forms, and develops new patterns. In a word, this chapter focuses on the idea of stasis, or balance if you will, which appears within the production of complex assemblages. Let's begin by saying that the name of the chapter, Geology of Morals, is a play on Nietzsche's book called Genealogy of Morals. In Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche critiqued the moral prejudices of Christianity and Judaism that functioned throughout history. Nietzsche thought that many supposedly nice moral imperatives that were imposed on people by Christianity, for example, in fact were power structures that rendered people totally weak. For Nietzsche, such binary distinctions like good and evil were not at all obvious. For example, in history, people who were weak often perceived themselves to be good, and people who were strong, they were often perceived to be bad. This is ridiculous, according to Nietzsche. Weakness has nothing to do with virtue. What Nietzsche is doing, then he examines the origins and meaning of different moral concepts. Again, similarly to Nietzsche's book Genealogy of Morals, Deleuze and Guattari are examining philosophical concepts that were put together throughout history. However, they're using scientific examples to solidify their critique of these concepts. That's exactly why the name of the chapter has geology in it. This chapter explicitly bases its argument on scientific states of affairs that may be found in geology, for example. The whole chapter is organized around a lecture by a science fiction character by the name of Professor Challenger, who was the protagonist in Arthur Conan Doyle's story Lost World. The lecture is mostly about the idea of stratification, or stasis, if you will. Again, Deleuze and Guattari try to explore how can various intensities be captured and controlled. They want to examine how assemblages can be condensed, thickened into more solid units. Deleuze and Guattari isolate three kinds of stratifications here: physical, organic, and linguistic. But more on that later. The lecture by Professor Challenger, who discusses the idea of stasis, is accompanied by one important dialogue between Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire and Georges Cuvier. Both of them were naturalists who lived in 19th century. But why Deleuze and Guattari are interested in them? Why are they interested in them? Well, it's because they disagreed on something crucial to the topic of stratification. Georges Cuvier believed that all species were fixed. They do not transform. While Geoffroy thought that species can be modified. They are subject to transformation. Deleuze and Guattari wish to add to Geoffroy's argument in this chapter by claiming that stratification, or stasis, is a result of a long process, and even when stasis is achieved, it is always merely transient. Important thing to note is that Cuvier based his belief that stasis is fixed on the account that God made the species this way. For Deleuze and Guattari, therefore, the relationship of fixed stratification and God becomes substantial. They think that when we are talking about fixed strata of the cosmos, we are at the same time talking about something like the judgment of God. That is to say, fixed stasis or stratification necessarily refers to the fixed omnipotent being, God. Well, Deleuze and Guattari were critical of that, to say the least. So how do Deleuze and Guattari describe stasis themselves? I will quote them now. Strata consist of giving form to matters, of imprisoning intensities or locking singularities into systems of resonance and redundancy, of producing upon the body of the earth molecules large and small and organizing them into molar aggregates. Strata are acts of capture. They are like black holes or occlusions striving to seize whatever comes within their reach. In other words, Stratifications are solid formations of intensities or physical particles that can be put under our scrutiny. For example, a sandstone forms by virtue of selection of particles that are organized into form. The way the particles harden in the sandstone defines the stratification of sandstone. Again, stratification captures flows of intensities and condenses them into molar aggregates. Molar aggregate being some kind of a distinct, singular, unique unit, an accumulation of intensities. We may also want to add that stratification functions with the help of what could be called thickening agents, such as coating or territorialization. These agents begin to create a world of arborescent hierarchical organization where the world is divided into clear-cut molar stratifications. Here, we should talk about another concept that is really important in this chapter, namely the concept of double articulation. The concept comes from linguistics, and at least in this chapter, the concept of double articulation is closely associated with a Danish linguist, Hjelmslev. Hjelmslev is discussed in this chapter because he brought some new and original ideas to the field of structuralist linguistics. If you want to find out more about this particular topic, make sure to watch my video on Lacan and language. Structuralist linguistics from the very beginning was based on a binary system of signifier and the signified. Signifier is the way we articulate something. We call computer a computer, while the signified is the very thing we try to articulate, the computer that I use, that I try to describe. Hjelmslev thought that this binary system of the signifier and the signified was not sufficient. He came up with the quadripartite system that was supposed to, in his view, replace this binary system of structuralist linguistics. Instead of the signifier and the signified, Hjelmslev introduced two different words, namely expression and content. Most importantly, Hjelmslev thought that both expression and content are in themselves made up out of form and substance. So, for example, expression of the word computer, the word computer itself has its own form and substance. Similarly, the content of the computer that I touch and I use itself has its own form and substance. To put it differently, there are two articulations. First articulation is that of the form and substance of the content, while the second articulation is that of the form and substance of the expression. Not only that, Hjelmslev also adds another term to this quadripartite system, namely purport or matter. The purport being the meaning or the sense that the double articulation of content and expression is trying to get across. The purport becomes, in Deleuze and Guattari's view, a kind of analog of the plane of consistency. Plane of consistency is the immanent energy, if you will, that exists before we think it. Plane of consistency is non-localized matter, which has no form, no shape, no stratification. How does it become stratified? Well, it becomes stratified by virtue of double articulation that we just discussed. Double articulation is the abstract machine that forms organizations by territorializing the plane of consistency. In other words, the matter that just exists there on the plane of consistency assumes content and expression, while the very content and that very expression assume form and substance respectively. This way of thinking allows Deleuze and Guattari to analyze the world that is both changing and, at certain points, somewhat static. The abstract machine of double articulation creates stratifications that are, to a degree at least, stable. However, every stratification owes its existence to the abstract machine of double articulation, which takes the plane of consistency and condenses it into stratification. This way, Deleuze and Guattari can distinguish among different strata while at the same time claiming that there is a kind of immanent continuity among all the strata. After all, for Deleuze and Guattari, the matter, the species, the linguistic matrix are always subject to change. Finally, let's go quickly through the three kinds of stratifications that Deleuze and Guattari isolate in this chapter, namely physical, organic, and linguistic. Physical stratification functions also by virtue of double articulations. Here we can relate the abstract machine of content and expression with the terms molar and molecular. Molecular is the intensive matter that is prone to change. That is the content of the matter, while the molar is the matter in the state of stasis, the expression of the matter. The transition from molecular to molar happens with the help of induction, as one particle is inducted to coalesce with another. Crystals, for example, go through these stages as they grow in size. By thinking this way, Deleuze and Guattari are able to interpret the organization of physical particles by way of double articulation. The organic stratification is different from physical because organic matter is able to reproduce. Instead of induction that allows one physical entity to grow, the organic stratification utilizes transduction in order to reproduce, according to Deleuze and Guattari, which essentially means transferring the organism that is foreign into the organism that is about to reproduce. And finally, the linguistic stratification functions by way of translation. Deleuze and Guattari are quick to point out that translation does not mean translating something from one language to the other. Instead, it means translating everything from other forms of stratifications, that of physical and organic, into language. This is again done with the help of the abstract machine of double articulation. In this chapter, as I said at the beginning, Deleuze and Guattari try to understand our existence as static and unfixed or unsteady at the same time. For Deleuze and Guattari, the development of the stratifications is exactly that. It is the development that is always rooted in the plane of consistency. Stratifications are rooted within the constantly changing environment. Stratification and change are both happening at the same time. Deleuze and Guattari want to put a message across, namely that only when we understand how stratification works can we truly create a rhizome. Well, thank you for watching. See you next time.